Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology Podcast, featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Hey, Gunkelman.
Oh, hey, Pete.
What do you say? When is our new podcast coming out?
What podcast is that?
Conservatism and Politics. Let's go. Environments and politics. What do you say, Jay?
I'm fine with environment. And I guess politics gets into environment. We've had a gigantic change in focus, and if you want to cut down the national forests in large swaths, I think that's really kind of not wise. But a good timber policy, on the other hand, is very good because you want to clear out enough so that you don't have overburden. And the way they plant after a clear cut is not really doesn't really come up healthy. You've got to go through and thin them. So there's some timbering that's needed just to make something healthy. A healthy forest has large trees with space in between and some rare small ones coming up, and that you can manage that. When you plant, from aerial planting, broadcasting seedlings, and that ends up going up an underbrush forest, and it's not really a healthy way to do things. So anyway, there are companies in the Northwest that manage forest lands that they own, and they do a nice job harvesting trees. It's a sustainable system because they plant appropriate trees for them to end up harvesting later. I don't know if you're into carpentry, if you go back in time, the end of a piece of wood, the grain was real tight. And now the end of a grain of wood, you can about draw it with your fingers, They're fast growing, but they're not structurally as sound, and they tend to warp. So old style dimensional lumber was a thing of the past, basically. And the quality is not what it was.
Well, one of the things that came up in the Q&A last night, Jay, was RFK Jr. and him going in a leadership position. Will that mean anything for neurofeedback? And we couldn't get a straight answer other than it depends. Do you have a thought, or it's wait and see for you too?
I think the diaper answer is about right. It depends. So. I can't really predict him because I don't think anybody could.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Well,
and he doesn't really, as an administrator, have the competence to grab the levers of the system and make change himself. And his chief aide, that was actually the head of Medicare and Medicaid previously under Trump, what was his chief aide, quit 2 weeks in. He's got some woman advisor that is apparently trying to run the show, and he just couldn't have it, so he left. So there's nobody really there that knows the system.
Well,
you got to know where the buttons of power are in order to push them. You can't just sit in his chair and rant. So.
Well, he said Trump's education person used to run a neurofeedback company, and they had some problems. DeVos. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Franchised neurofeedback operations are not always a good idea. And
Why is that?
uh, well, think of it. Have you ever had a fine dining experience in a fast food restaurant? I mean, uh, uh, it's a least common denominator service
Well,
by definition.
what kind of restaurant is neurofeedback? Is it fast casual?
Well,
Is it a
well,
cheesecake factory?
if it depends upon who you go to. It uh, it's an art. And like art, you can find people that are Dutch master that paint with a single freaking bristle brush and it comes out looking like it's live. And you can also find people that paint with buckets, throwing paint. So pick the kind of art that you think is appropriate for your circumstance, and there's people out there that fit the style. If you're a standard person with no complaint and you want to general health and wellness it, there are devices out there for that. But you can also come in with a particular purpose, and to hell with the DSM. If you've got a complaint of some sort, I'm not feeling good, I'm not right, is there some way to fix this? That's not really a general health and wellness sort of a thing. And you've pretty much got to go to somebody who can end up evaluating what's going on and figuring it out and plotting a path forward to fix it. So those operations aren't large fast food operations that give a standard product. They're a specialty, personal service, individual practice, or occasionally there's practice groups, but they're usually individual. They're just loosely linked. They're not really franchises. The franchises that have happened end up having the franchisees sue the franchise company for false claims in their promotional thing. They promise them all this, spreadsheet, volume equals income, and it doesn't really work like that. So, and they change their name. The same operation changes its name and keeps going. And franchises are an odd business. Every single state has its own franchise law. So if you're going to run a franchise that's not just inside one state, you're going to have a freaking lawyer that can do 50 states custom franchise submissions on an annual basis. It's crazy. Unless you're really, really big, like, a fast food place that is serving, huge tonnage, you really, a handful of neurofeedback practices in each state would be a nightmare to manage. But they don't. They market it and end up with practices that are set up on a franchise basis. And
Well, to have a franchise, you need to have standards, right? Standardization.
It's standardization, but it's again least common denominator.
What does that
So
mean? Why are there no franchises? Why are there no, why hasn't it happened?
Well,
or happened and failed?
So far, all of the ones that have done that have been failures to the point where there's been litigation. There's Lee Gerdes, and if you punch his name in, you'll find a series of different practices that he ended up having as franchises. And they, and then punch in litigation, and you'll see that they're all class action litigations for the franchisees against the franchise. And
GURTIS, Gerdes.
GERDES maybe.
Okay.
I'm not a speller of names, but
nor am I a rememberer.
But he's been around a long time. It's not that his hardware was bad hardware, but again, if you're running things with a standard model of some sort, what are you going to get? Size 42 long? how's that going to fit you? You know,
Lee
it,
Gerdes, Gerdes, inventor and founder of Saraset.
and prior to that, there was a couple of other franchise names that they slipped my mind at the time, but I try not to even think about him. You know, so
So,
I
so
I
the
got
problem that
I got to go wash my mouth out having said his name. Um,
Jay, I'm an American, not Americant. What do you think the issues were? Claims, just saying, "Hey, we can treat versus train." Like, what are the issues with these people?
well, you can look into their litigation. There's public
Allegedly.
filings there. But what you basically end up seeing is somebody who wants to come into the field that doesn't necessarily have a background in the field. A franchise is an appealing way to buy in. Now it's a good sized purchase, and then there's monthly fees and there's per client fees, and they basically bleed your practice. And the spreadsheets that showed if you get a certain number of clients a week, you end up making a small fortune over time, and they'll help you with the advertising and blah blah blah. And it's, if that worked well, the litigation wouldn't be there. You know,
Well, I would think it would help. You would have at least standardization of marketing where you could buy in scale, so you'd be spending less on marketing and a consistent message, buying
well,
products.
that's what a society is for. The APBs and ISNRs are the ones that should be promoting the field. And as members of that, you would end up benefiting from the general float of the additional visibility.
How long have
And
you been doing it?
I've been in the field 52 years. It's a fabulous way to make a small fortune, starting with a big one,
Big one, yeah. But
So,
I don't want to just point fingers. I want to offer a solution. Is there something that they can do if you're saying
you
franchising
know,
is not the way
it's possible in the future as AI is integrated with EEG lab for assessment and prediction of protocol, you may have advanced customized standardization. Now, that's a ways off. If you want to see a presentation about that approach, you can come to the Suisun Summit, and Lisa Tataryn is going to be demonstrating AI interface with EEG Lab, showing you how it's done. Um, so,
Dr. Marie Swingle, welcome. We were talking about franchising neurofeedback and why companies that have tried it haven't been successful.
Do you want my take on that?
Please.
Because they try and cook all the food the same way, and all our brains are not the same. There's some commonalities, but if you try to do the exact same thing with everybody without looking at the detail of the individual, you lose your efficacy.
As I said, it hasn't worked to date, and the litigation against the franchise companies ends up showing that. I propose that in the future, if you couple AI with EEG lab for assessment of the brain and prediction of a custom protocol, we may get around the standardization being the least common denominator and actually have it be a personalized approach. But that's a ways off. And as I said, Lisa Tataryn's going to show that kind of an AI EEG lab interface at the Suisun Summit coming up.
If I could do a little chest pounding here too, in terms of what we do here at the Swingle Clinic. Kenyon, if you're not literally tracking the changes in the data of the mini sample that you're working with, which I call your clients, you have to have eyes on this all the time.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's a spot for AI in there. But people have heard me say this a million times, you need the human in the loop. You need assisted intelligence, not artificial intelligence yet. Also, what Joshua was saying yesterday, I really still like the term machine learning. It's not intelligence yet, it's learning. And I don't know. Can we make a new little precedent on this show that we constantly differentiate? Because there's so much. And Pete, I'm still in my ordinary mood from yesterday. There's just so much bullshit out there about artificial intelligence. It's not intelligent at all. A lot of it. Some of it is. Most of it isn't. How's that for a rant, Pete and Jay?
Plagiarized intelligence.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That as well, yeah. Pete
Well,
smiles. He likes it when I get ornery and angry and swear, doesn't he?
well, artificial intelligence. Okay, if we can get past the semantics, we're talking about why things haven't franchises because we have to have standards. And Jay's telling me the standards are being offered by AAPB and ISNR. Does everybody?
And the QEEG certification board just came out with a set of standards, so that they're out there, and the field needs to be promoted in order for it to grow, and the societies are there to do that. We as a company, we started to advertise in the Bay Area on radio. And it immediately got complaints, called in, and Ali's obviously Middle Eastern, and there was some complaint just about that, and but there were people that complained, and finally that kind of dwindled down. But then he put on television ads, and that fostered major complaints. There were complaints that went all the way to the DA, who assigned an investigator who came to the office and investigated what we were doing and reported back to the courts. And Ali was called into the courts, to the family courts in front of the judges, and they basically wanted to set up a referral network so that they could send kids from the courts to be evaluated in the practice. So these complaints ended up being a fabulous new source of income because the parents are mandated by the courts to pay the bill. And they pay the bill up front when they come in for the testing, and you represent the kid, not the parents, and so we're doing EEG, QEEG evaluations, and paper and pencil psych testing and stuff. So
Another thing that came up in the Q&A, Jay, was we're talking about if there was one thing, if we could put an overlay of everybody that's doing a raw EEG, what would be the data point that you would try to snag? I know you want more than one, but just to get everybody in the habit of sharing non-identifying data in a place that could be used by everybody to help get the field greater. Can you just pick one data point, or it's just like you need a positive, you need a negative, you need a ground, do you need more than one? Like, what would you do?
Well, I think EEG has been learned historically by looking over the shoulder of somebody flipping paper. And it's online watching EEG going by with comments and pointing at things and drawing lines under some waveforms to emphasize something. And then after you've looked at the waveforms, doing a quantitative processing to show the spectral presence of them and a component analysis to show the source of the component. So that kind of learning what the EEG is being done in groups, you know, 30 people, 20 people, sometimes 2 or 3 people. But it's waveform. You just have to get experience looking at waveforms.
I
And
can add here too, Pete, that it's kind of like asking who's your favorite child, like which one is behaving better on what day? And what are you looking at? Like
yeah,
what's the purpose of the investigation? I mean,
The
if we're
purpose of the
getting
investigation,
some
if Jay
diagnosis.
Gunkelman and Dr. Marie Swingle are no longer here, does all this findings go with you, or is there something that's going to be left behind that we can carry forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for the compliment. I'm honored to be used in the same phrase as Master Guru Jay
oh
Gunkelman.
geez, don't do
But
that.
the really beautiful thing about Jay is, Jay, you've been making a massive effort to pass on as much knowledge to some really talented people, and they're starting to carry the torch, which is really, really nice to see. So we're we have under
We're
our
trying to
guard.
teach them how to carry the torch.
Yeah, yeah. No, for what we do, we
I
have
have
some
pictures of me carrying the Olympic torch in 2002, Salt Lake City. So,
okay.
uh,
But to get everybody on the same page, there's got to be something like, well, 20 people here, 30 people here. Can we get those 20 and 30 to connect with, a network hub or a rich club hub of other people that are out there that can combine this stuff, and instead of sitting on the information, because more quality data is
Yeah.
better than less quality data, right?
Pete, do you want me to go on the rant I went on yesterday? I mean, I'm
Yeah, go
happy.
ahead. We got to fill
No,
40
I'm
minutes.
happy and unhappy to do this. I think, I've been blessed to, be second generation. I've been around a long time. When I was much younger, I did a lot of listening and watching. With our greats, our foremothers and forefathers, many unfortunately who have already passed. And there was lots of jousting and lots of fighting, but everybody was sharing everything. And the scaffolding of what was going on was incredible. Now, also branching, that's also where some of the conflict came from. But I would say a lot of the conflict until very, very recently was productive, although the style wasn't, it could have stayed more amicable. My major complaint now is any of us that are putting major time and money into the R&D, there are too many parasitic companies or individuals who essentially, when we share things, they're taking it and commercializing it. And so what many of us are starting to do is just hold it under our wings, and it's wrong, wrong, wrong. The clinical cue that, my father developed, and I was very, very strongly in the background of all of that, working with him, was put out in 2015, and that's still the basis. And I won't name any companies, but that's still the basis of a lot of, wellness products out there. And we work with the two FDA companies very, very openly. We have good relationships with them. But we have, the 2024, 2025 new database. And when I do my grand rounds, et cetera, I share lots of stuff, but we're not publishing the damn thing. And it's stupid, but I'm not publishing it because I don't want to, it's stolen again. So there's my rant. So friends become friends again. Let's start cooperating. Let's collaborate. Let's all commercialize together. Everybody needs to make a living. I'm not against making a living.
I thought it was co-opetition. I'm confused.
Well, I'm sure. And I think,
yeah.
I mean, Jay, you can jump in because you were shoulder to shoulder with the group that I'm speaking about. But I don't think
There are
anyone.
times when you come up with something that you have a product that you can license at a reasonable fee, so others can use it.
Yeah.
But there's ways to protect intellectual property that you need to be aware of. That's all. But
Mhm.
and those are all. Each nation has their own. So Canada will have some laws that the U.S. might not even.
Yeah.
But uh,
it's zillions of dollars and approximately 4 years to get the
yeah,
protection, and by that time it's out. Yeah, no, but believe me, we've looked.
I mean, are you talking
yeah,
about a patent or like a process that somebody's stealing or a protocol? What?
It processes and protocols, yeah. Like the
yeah,
protocols, well, again, there's nothing negative about people using it with their individual clients. It's about the commercialization and
yeah,
the selling of the intellectual property is where I draw the line.
yeah.
It's the selling.
I've never had a difficulty with others. Uh, all of my early customers are now providers of QEG services.
Mhm.
Richard Suter was a customer. Bob Gurney was a customer. But and all of them are essentially competitors. But I don't have any competition. There isn't any. So I'm not worried about that. Um,
Jay's
yeah.
on the top of the hill.
But there is competition out there, unfortunately, and people are listening.
Uh, they're products fighting for market share in a niche market. Uh,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, there's worry and worry. As I said, Jay has just given so much to our whole discipline so generously throughout time. And I said there's really no competition for many of us on one level. But on other levels, I think I don't know what phraseology to use in terms of bees and bonnets. It's like there should be collaboration on these things as opposed to and sharing and building together. And yes, profit, but
yeah,
it's a matter of it's
and
collaboration versus taking. I suppose is as simple as that.
and internationally, it's actually doing quite well.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, Suisun this year is bringing over Silvana from Macedonia. Let me share this.
Mhm.
Um, uh, 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 she's quite high up in European neuroscience, and um, I'm aware of her because her teacher, Jordan Pop-Jordanov, was the head of quantum physics for the Soviet Union, and he taught me about quantum effects in the EEG. So I knew about him, and he's the only person in that I know that crossed over my avocation and my vocation, neuroscience and also environment. He, when the Soviet Union fell apart, he was the head of the Academy of Science and Arts in Macedonia, and he did the greenhouse gas offset calculations for the UN. So I actually got some money that was set aside in California that got some funds over to him. Anyway, he's passed more recently, but she's coming over. She started the Macedonia Psychophysiology Society, which is part of the International Psychophysiology Societies at this point, and she's going to be talking about paroxysmal, non-epileptic, but paroxysmal activity in autism and ADD, ADHD. So, um, anyway, we've got internationally, the field is growing in a way that you don't see or feel if you sit here in the U.S. U.S. centric. Uh, uh, the Australasian Society, ANSA, is really active and is doing a really good job.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.
Really.
SAN in Europe, BFE in Europe, the Spanish Society, the Italian Society.
Yeah. They're huge.
The Brazilian has a group. Obviously South Korea. Um, internationally, it's actually doing the field's so bright. I got to cover one eye now. So it's it's really astoundingly exploding, and the kinds of analysis that are being done are also really quite more advanced than it. Although there are those that uh, grumble about ICA and things like that. There's no real question about that internationally, and the use of it has allowed depth of analysis that you wouldn't have otherwise. I had a guru group come to me and say, uh, for centuries we've had these sounds, and we want you to do EEG and show us the spectra of the EEG with the sounds to see if we can see the different sounds in the EEG. And, I said, well, you can hire me to do that, but you're not going to see anything, and the raw spectra is going to have so much other stuff in it that the sound, I don't even know what the magic sounds were, and they're not magic sounds. I don't want to. They're phonemes, and I don't want to make fun of their stuff because it's a big deal for them. But imagine A, E, I, O, and U, different vowel sounds. Okay, you tell me you can see the difference between A, E, I, O, and U in the overall EEG spectra. Yeah, right. So, um, and I said, well, if let me do a little pilot study, I'll look to see if we can do it at a higher level of analysis. And we looked at it with ICA component analysis, and there were components that were very small components, down in the 5% range of the overall EEG variability. You're not going to see something that's a 5%er in the overall EEG. It's lost. But in that little tiny component, you could see the difference between AAIO and U. So we not only had sensitivity to the sound, but also specificity to which one. And we showed that to them, and they were, first of all, they were not familiar with the kind of analysis at all, but that's no surprise. We play with stuff ahead of our time sometimes. And this is quite a while ago now. There's actually a video of me doing a presentation with a guru down in San Diego. They rented a big studio. They flew me down, and I showed the analysis and the EEG and the components that showed the different phonemes and their impact on the EEG. And they broadcast that to 300,000 people worldwide. It was a setup and announced and all of that. So it was it was an odd one, but it was if it's got an EEG in it, I'm happy to do the analysis of it, and the ability to actually be sensitive at that level of differentiating what vowel it is inside of a very subtle component ends up being a form of analysis that just isn't done commonly.
Well, in the bigger picture, though, Jay, I could see in terms of, anybody studying early childhood, and the variation or non-variation in different types of talk of parents to children. That could actually be kind of interesting in terms of what you're stimulating and how you're stimulating, because it's pretty international. This very specific early sounds that parents make to children, and of course, many people have studied the reverse. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there's something in all of this.
Where do you think we get off on the standardization? I mean, the 1020 system, is everybody sold on that? Is everybody doing that as far as placement?
So, I really hope so, because otherwise we're looking at junk.
Actually, 1010 system, the 1020 system, you have T3 and T5, and in the 1010 system, it's T7 and P7. And the P7 is actually on the parietal side of the temporoparietal junction, so it's an honest call, but it matches up for the designations match up for the much higher density of a 1010 electrode placement system. And there are people that are going for a higher density to try to get more fine resolution.
You
But there's
mean more sensors?
more sensors to get better resolution for localization approaches and things such as that. And there's a diminishing return on that. If you go from 19 to 36, you get better. You go to 124, it gets better, but not by that much. And 256, well, that's really not much better than the 124. So it's it doesn't matter at some point, and the 19 is adequate for what we're doing. There's no database out there that's got more electrodes other than the brain resource company, who had some additional electrodes for their event-related potential testing.
I should probably qualify though there, Pete. I think it piggybacks very well on what we were talking about yesterday. As long as they're defined, and almost anybody, when they're writing about something, if it's not 1020, then they'll let you know. Or just as Jay was saying, by the number of electrodes, you know that there's a different system. The other is, it's the same as the bandwidth. We always now write, is your alpha 8 to 12, or Jay very frequently comments on, oh, that's not alpha, that's fast theta, or vice versa. Just name your bandwidth, not just give the hertz of your bandwidth, not just the title. And the same thing with your sites.
What I was looking for was an agreement on standardization, and trying to figure out where we're getting lost here, because it seems like, well, the sensors need to go here, whether it's 19 or 36, however level of detail you want to get into. That doesn't seem like to be a problem.
No, the localization for the electrodes are standard. Now, they're, how many channels you have and for what purpose vary. If you're doing for assessment, 19 is kind of the standard, but there are mini cues with fewer electrodes, and those are better than not looking, but they're not the same as a complete review. And some of those are done 2 electrodes at a time, and then making it look like they're all happening at the same time in a spectra. And that's not quite right.
Gross disservice, because you can't compare in real time, and sometimes it doesn't matter. So that, that's where standardization, how do you determine when it's very, very relevant that you have simultaneous reporting versus not? And I think that's also, if you write something or publish something, that has to be absolutely clear, and the limitations right out there. And if people don't state that, then they deserve a critique, right? And so,
lens equipment did a couple of electrodes at a time, slowly surveying the head, and then calling that an assessment. But there, you start out here and you're wide awake, and you end up over here and you're halfway asleep. And you've got to do simultaneous recordings, and if you're being assessed, you should really get assessed well. Don't cheap out on the evaluation. It's important to have a good EEG evaluation before you jump in.
If you
But
do the
before Pete goes on there, I think that's another big one in terms of, yes, have a really good assessment, but how is it being cleaned? Who's looking at it? How is it being
Yeah, well, that's
broadcasted? Who or what is looking at the impedance? And again, that's a big problem in standardization.
well,
I know Jay has seen them. We've all seen them. When you just people submit things and it's like, whoa, there's like a basic
yeah.
little
well,
issue in here.
on that issue, Dr. Marie, is there's people out there that are doing 5-minute eyes closed, 10-minute eyes closed, 20-minute. I mean, I've seen it myself where that's not standardized. What? Because
There are standards for EEG that not everybody ends up following them. They include doing calibration documentation, running a set of calibrations before you do each recording so that you actually know that your amplifier is working properly, and then recording the EEG with more than one montage. And nowadays, the recording with more than one montage is not an issue because you can remontage the digital EEG. But the, the the total time of 20 to 30 minutes minimum is defined in the EEG standards. And if an insurance company audits you and you're doing 5-minute recordings, you're going to end up having to pay back anything that they paid you because you didn't meet standards. And I would suggest that that's, what's the likelihood of that ever happening? We had an insurance company come back and ask for $1 million back from somebody who billed through insurance, and he beat them in court, but that they were claiming he did false billing, but he had a recording of the insurance people telling him exactly how to do the billing, and that's how he did it. So anyway, insurance companies do audit, and they're looking for a way to claw back money if they're auditing.
so where do you think we're getting lost then?
Oh, well, not everybody pays any attention to the standards of EEG. I teach the EEG standards, but 10 minutes eyes open, 10 minutes eyes closed makes 20 minutes, which is a bare minimum. 7 minutes eyes open, 7 minutes eyes closed, and 7 minutes of, I don't know, reading task or VCPT of some sort, some other task. So you can actually meet the standards pretty readily. If you do a VCPT task and record the EEG, you can end up with event-related potentials that you can pull out of it as well, and that's an added benefit. So in a 40-minute procedure, you get 20 minutes of EEG and another 20 minutes of EEG that turns into ERP. And the event-related potentials added onto the EEG end up being able to look at the EEG at rest, eyes open and eyes closed at rest, and the EEG on task. And it's a standardized task. And it's like a TOVA or an IVA. You get omission errors, commission errors, reaction time, and variability, but you also get to see the brain's components that make that up. The visual detection of the signal, the processing of that signal, the engagement of the motor response, the suppression of the motor response, the anterior cingulate, deciding you did it right or wrong. Sometimes you perform perfectly, but your cingulate's firing off. Well, that's an OCD, So, but that component analysis of the ERP is a huge step up in analysis of the brain's function, and that's a 40-minute procedure total, eyes open, eyes closed, and a 20-minute VCPT.
Most people know, we know what it should be. And if for any reason we decide to cut a corner, there tends to be a very legitimate clinical reason for it. In research, it's never acceptable. And arguably, I might backtrack even on the clinical. But I think the major issue is the attitude or the lack of spread of knowledge. Individuals who either don't know that you need the 20 minutes, and that's what this show is for. Thank you, Pete, for doing this every week, and obviously Jay. But the bigger
Team effort.
dilemma, I think, is individuals that don't care. Okay, so I think we need to attack or disseminate don't know and don't care. Those are our issues, because the knowledge is out there for anybody who cares to listen or read through it. The standards are
Yeah.
out there. Would you concur, Jay?
So, some people will hear in a workshop that you can get a good QEEG of alpha within 60 seconds, and 60 seconds of good data. Well, that's different than the medical standard for the total recording time. If you de-artifact it and you've got 60 seconds of data, your alpha is going to be fairly stable, but your theta is not. Hushang Hushmand in the 1980s published a nice study showing the total amount of time and the total amount of time with retest reliability. So variability basically based on total time. And alpha stabilized with about 60 seconds worth of data. Beta stabilized with a little bit more, but basically 60 seconds was adequate. Delta was a little longer, but theta was 270 seconds. Well, why? Theta is an intermittent. It comes and goes quite often. And how do you get a stable sampling of an intermittent? You have to have enough time. So if you had a shorter period of time, you might catch it one time and not the next. So that's a high amount of variability between it because of the length of time. So, and why theta? Well, theta, again, tends to be transients in the temporal lobe. Epileptiform content is paroxysmal slow content. So those kinds of things, you're lucky to see one of them in a 20-minute study. You have a 50%, just over 50% chance of seeing a known epileptic's discharge in a 20-minute study. That's why they want longer studies.
That's a good one too, as well, in terms of standard neurology versus, the work we do, the EEG, that very typically, when folks go into hospital to check if there's a leptiform, it's just not seen. It's not long enough to capture it.
Yes.
Is the EDF format, is that standardized?
That's a standard European data format plus EDF plus.
Okay. What percentage of practitioners?
There's EDF, there's UDF, there's EG Lab has their own file format that's within it. So, but they're common file formats that are available. So,
Guesstimate, what do you think the percentage is on EDF? I've only seen EDFs in my limited.
EDFs are probably the most common file transfer between systems. You can go to Excel Tech, which is a medical company, and they got their own file format, but they'll export an EDF. They don't have any trouble exporting an EDF.
So then how does the silo, like we're talking about 20, 30 people at a time doing the right thing. When I hold on to the EDF report, they have somebody with a symptom. I'm just going through the identifiers. You use a symptom, and then here's the outliers. I made the recording. Here's the collection. I'm going to put it here. Are you going to say this is the symptom? This is like, what are you going to track in order to keep this stuff proprietary to yourself?
I start by looking at the EEG, knowing the age. And I prefer not knowing the symptom complaint or a diagnosis or something. We can have perceptual bias. Perceptual bias. What the hell's that? Well, if I think you've got something left frontal, somebody said, oh, he has depression with left frontal alpha. Well, and somebody said this guy's depressed, you might think, oh, I can look for something left frontal. If I'm looking here, I'm not looking here. There's a whole page full of of streaming data. You need to let it catch your eye. You shouldn't be focusing on a spot. You should take it in, spend a fair amount of time on the first couple of pages, and after that, what you've seen is now background, and you can go faster. Just look for something that catches your eye, and then the events that end up happening will catch your eye. Sometimes they're artifacts, sometimes they're real. That takes experience, but it has to be reviewed, and the review ends up identifying sometimes specific discharges that are diagnostic, sometimes non-specific discharges. But a visual review has to be done to throw out artifact before you can quantitatively process it. And there's routine artifacts, eye blinks and muscle tension and stuff, but there's subtle ones that people don't expect sometimes.
100% with Jay. In fact, what we're known, we give every single client the option of doing top down or bottom up. So top down is the really classic way you approach a doctor's appointment. Tell me what your symptoms are, what you're here for, how can I help you? And then you look at the EEG. Bottom up is exactly the opposite. As Jay said, the only two things you must know are age and gender. I underline gender now because it's political. We talk about biological at this point. And it takes away any chance of bias or subjectivity. The other thing, I mean, Jay and I can go on and on and on about the DSM. We can go on and on about the definition. Like if somebody comes in and says, I am depressed, I'm not going to argue with them. I'm not going to say, oh, well, the frontal lobes. No, I'm going to go deeper at that point and look at, is there something in the brain that could be contributing to how you're feeling? And at that point, we just kick out the label. We just look at the label for convenience of progression. But yeah, you got to. I'm so for bottom up, where the client is.
My normal grand rounds, which I have like 30 people, online looking at it, I'll go through the EEG knowing the age, and that's it. And I'll look at the EEG and describe what I'm seeing and when I'm seeing it, and point at the waveforms and the state changes, whatever transients are going on. And when I'm done with it, I've talked about what parts of the brain are working right, what parts of the brain are not working, and what it's going to look like as a neuropsychiatric presentation. And when I'm done, then I find out, okay, whose patient is this? So somebody posted this into the group, and I've gone through and I've told you what I think, but that's just what I think. There's still what's the complaint, and I've described a whole bunch of things I think might be complaints. So, but it's surprising at the end of that you find that you've described the patient, and if the EEG reflects our consciousness, shouldn't it reflect our cognitive neuropsychological presentation if you know what you're looking at?
It's jaw-dropping for the client when you do that, and especially the parents of the individual. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing we shouldn't forget about, though, is the liability. That every once in a while you do see these markers that have not expressed themselves. So you have to be really careful about that. I always say, my classic example that I use with clients is alcohol will not light without a match. And I said, this person's got the alcohol, be careful of matches, right? But they might not be symptomatic.
We may find like 5 things, and after that, when you find out about the patient, they may have a list of their complaints, and they may change the order at which one of the 5 things you do first, because their complaints should rank your intervention to a certain extent. You might find something that kind of trumps them. An epileptiform discharge kind of trumps somebody's, thing about something somewhere else, but you still end up having to rank order how you're going to intervene. What's your procedural method of going at this? How do you fix it? Sometimes it's multiple steps. A low voltage fast EEG, no background activity that you can see. Adrian had alpha. Matthews had an EEG with no apparent rhythmicity. It's the low voltage fast that we call it today, but there's no rhythm there, And for an EEG like that, if you're going to train alpha or alpha theta, you have to do some SMR training first just to get some rhythmicity. And so that there are some things you do a step at a time. Oh, we'll do some central SMR, wind them down a little bit, get some rhythmicity, and then we can shape their alpha up. A low voltage fast person learning to make alpha quits taking alcohol. They don't need it. Now, there's other reasons to take alcohol. You might have an OCD drive, but if you have a low voltage fast EEG, that's a classic alcoholism pattern. You might be a teetotaler, but your family has a history of it, and that's the EEG you've got. So you're over aroused. It's gene number 4. It controls GABA A receptors, and you oversaturate yourself with receptors. You can't get enough GABA to saturate them, so you're over aroused. And unless you learn how to do it yourself, you're going to be dependent on a source for GABA, beer, opioids. I mean, the GABA and opioid receptors end up having similar winding you down effects. So people get hooked on things pretty readily.
So Jay and Mari, when you look at a raw recording, do you compare it to a database, or you've seen so many that you know what it is? Do you do a QEEG, or you just make the call off of the raw EEG?
I would say yes.
If people send through the company, they get the view and interpretation, but they also get all the normative comparisons as well. And I haven't written any reports since I turned 70, and Vera Grenyanshenko, MD, PhD, epileptologist, electroencephalographer, child neurologist in St. Petersburg, Russia. It writes our reports. She's really good.
For the people that aren't as skilled as you two, I guess they're going to be relying on these comparisons, and kind of where I'm trying to get to the next roadblock, and we don't have time to talk about it. I just want to get acknowledgement is you have like Thatcher's database, you have the Russian database. Where do those databases come in to define what abnormal is, or am I mislabeling that?
They're just non-rubber rulers you can use to judge data, and each one of them has their own strengths and weaknesses, and I've got my preference.
Is that synonymous with marketing?
Well, no.
Okay.
There's technical differences. If you're interested in gamma frequencies in the 40 hertz range with norms, you don't have norms in NeuroGuide above 30. And in NX-Link, they didn't have norms above 25. And the Korean and Russian went to 45. But they've got data up to 150. They just didn't run norms up that high.
You didn't even bring up gender yet.
Yeah, well, there's that as well. I mean,
and that's only the Koreans.
Mari,
right?
No. The Koreans showed that gender was an important factor. The HBI database in Europe gathered more data and split their male and female populations and redid their norms.
I would say that like all databases have their positives and their negatives. And I think it's really, really important to know. I mean, one of the big critiques is, what is normative? What is typical? Most really, really brilliant people sure as hell are not typical, right? So also, when you're training to normative, that's a big thing to look at. But I think as comparative, all of these things are valuable, but just I wouldn't take them as gold standard, because some of the variation in your clients, you do not want to take out. Some of that variation is really, really working well for them. But I mean, we all need somewhere to start. I think in terms of a generalized critique of our profession, and one of the things, again, I just kudos to Jay for his continued education, is I think too much of this knowledge that isn't just speaking to the norm or just to the typical. And a lot of those variants are in our heads and are in our individual practices. And I think we do have a duty to disseminate that. I mean, even what Jay was just saying in terms of, hey, if you've got this condition, or if you see this pattern, don't even bother working with that pattern. You have to go to somewhere else, or that pattern won't move. We know that, but just in terms of where that is, quote unquote, written down or within the systems, it's not. So we do have a duty to share.
Before I quit writing reports and retired, the company used to do 90-minute CE talks, and the CEs were APA and BCIA and ABRIT, which is Assets, the EG Tech Societies group. Anyway, when we quit doing those, I had a whole bunch of 90-minute recordings. I got 24 of those suckers, and I put them on my Facebook page in the video folder. They're public domain.
Nice.
You can't get CEs for them anymore, but all those talks are there. So, people should feel free.
Well, why are we talking about all this? Because we talked about it last night in the NeuroNoodle Neurofeedback Q&A with all of our lovely people popping in and our panelists. That's why we're talking about it. Dr. Marie, what you also talked about last night was you have an app out there. Is that true?
Yes, we have an app that we currently, one is the sleep app, Swingle Sonic Sleep, and the other is Swingle Sonic BrainCalm. And speaking of data, completely 100% data-driven, data-based. We've now presented an N of 80. In clinic, we're kissing 135 now. So the data is really, really strong in terms of its efficacy and efficiency. It's a great potentiator for anybody working in neurotherapy. So essentially this is done as a home protocol along with the neurotherapy, but individuals can also use it 100% independent of neurotherapy. And we share the data.
Our favorite Italians, right?
Yes.
Speaking of Italians, Lisa Bortoloro is coming over from Italy to do a talk on an epilepsy case that she trained and is now seizure-free for a year. And the family dynamics that change during that and everything. She's got a very nice case report on that. She'll be over for the Suisun Summit presenting on that.
When is that, Jay?
October 8th, everybody stops in for their evening cocktail and says hello, a welcoming reception.
Happy birthday.
The 9th, 10th, and 11th is the 3 days of the meeting. The evening of the 11th is a dinner. Lee Seinberg is going to be there. He'll do the finishing talk on the 11th, and that should be interesting. So we're looking forward to it. As I said, Silvana's coming over from Macedonia, Lisa from Italy. We've got a young researcher coming over from Australia. Santiago's coming from Singapore. Folks pop up from Peru and Brazil, and it's
Chicago.
and Chicago. But it's all to Suisun. the town of 29,000 people with two little micro hotels, a Holiday Inn Express, and the Hampton Suites. So, but that we just take over the yacht club, and it works about right. It sits 80 people real comfortably, and we live stream the image to the big screen in the bar, so people that want to just kick back and not sit at a and watch it from inside the room can get it. And we last year had 30 people that signed up for the live stream internationally. The travel wasn't convenient or whatever.
And everybody that shows up gets to check out the Gunkelman.
Oh, sorry.
I say everybody. Go ahead, Jay.
This year we do have Mary giving everybody a copy of the Gunkelman if they pop in for the meeting.
Dr. Marie, you want to close out?
No, I was just going to make a really bad joke about the individuals watching from the bar what's going on with those are the GABA people.
Pete has an on-the-air sign in neon and a microphone. So
you got the low voltage sitting room and the...
Let me tell you about neurofeedback. Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle, thank you for another great episode of the NeuroNoodle Neurofeedback Podcast. Everybody have a great weekend.
Enjoy yours, Pete.
All right, bye-bye. Over and out. Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.